Today on TandTeaching.
Cargo was established really back in 2016 and then launched in 2019 between Chaz Golden and myself. And it was to originally highlight the accomplishments and achievements of people of African and African Diaspora heritage were often missing through history.
Children have the information at their fingertips, and they're aware of the diversity of the global kind of society we live in, and they want to know more. They want to know more unique stories. They want to know more interesting narratives. And I think for us, it's about that engagement and about people kind of being tuned in and wanting to learn.
Welcome to TandTeaching, the educational podcast you can listen to with a cup of tea. I'm Arthur Moore, and with me, as always, he's there. It's Mike Harrell. Hi, Mike.
Hello, Arthur. How are you?
I'm very, very good today, buddy. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Very good.
Do you want to hear who we've got on the pod today?
I would love to.
Well, Mike, we are talking to Chaz and Lawrence from the Cargo movement. And you're probably thinking, Mike, what is cargo? And do you know what? I think it's best to let Chaz and Lawrence explain it, because they will do it far better justice than I can. So everyone go away, get the kettle on, get a cup of tea, get a biscuit. And when we're back, we're going to be talking to Chaz and Lawrence all about cargo and how it can, well, you'll find out. See you in a moment. Welcome back to TandTeaching. We are joined today by Chaz and Lawrence from Cargo. Welcome to the pod.
Yeah, hi guys.
So I think we should jump in. Lawrence, do you want to give us the quick story about what is Cargo all about?
Okay, well, a quick intro. Cargo was established really back in 2016 and then launched in 2019 between Chaz Golden and myself. And it was to originally highlight the accomplishments and achievements of people of African and African Diaspora heritage were often missing through history. And instead of looking at this empowering, normalized story that we hear, it was to actually have a story, put together a collection of work that would inspire people. And so Cargo as a name, Cargo actually stands for Charting African Resilience, Generating Opportunities. And we were looking at a timeline originally of like 400 years, 500 years, and showing all the individuals, and every individual through this timeline was standing on the shoulder of the individual before them. That enabled us to be here today talking to you on this podcast. And it was through working, so originally we were going to put together an installation in the city of Bristol, which was actually going to be put into shipping containers. And that's how the name Cargo came up in the beginning, because they were cargo containers. So that was the first thing, and it was looking at using holograms, video, and projection mapping within this installation to tell this story. This was due to happen, first of all, around 2019 and then 2020. And then 2020 came, COVID came. People all of a sudden really didn't want to be kept in a confined space with people. But at the same time, we were still looking at the education side of what Cargo could deliver. Well, we felt in the beginning that we had to do something magnificent and fascinating to get people interested in this story and interested in this body of work. We actually, when that happened, we turned it into Cargo Classroom, which then that's where it became an online resource, education resources, telling this story that we wanted to ensure to have the biggest reach it could have possible, so it became an online resource. And what was very important to us from the beginning was that this resource would be free, because we wanted to remove as many barriers that had been in place after doing, we've done workshops with a lot of teachers, did a lot of, fact-finding work to find out what was problematic with delivering this work, what the problems were. So one of them was the resources weren't available. One was that schools or teachers don't have the resources as in costs to be able to buy in new work. So we went, right, we're going to make it, and we're going to make it free. We're going to put it online so it's accessible to everybody. And that's kind of the beginning of this work. And we've worked with an amazing collective of artists, creatives, teachers, in all different specialist fields to be able to put this work together. And without everybody coming together, we wouldn't have been able to get to where we are today. So it's a very collaborative piece of work.
Collaborative is exactly the word I kind of like think when you go through your resources and your website and your videos like that, you can see the amount of input that's coming from different areas into what you're doing. Chaz, why is this like, how did you kind of get involved? Because I'm just interested how this kind of, that conversation led to this between you and Lawrence, how this led to Cargo kind of at the start.
Yeah, I mean, it was really, I mean, Lawrence has been writing poetry for several years, and I came across his poems in a bookshop in Bristol before I'd even met the guy, and bought one of his books. And I just thought that I was just really intrigued by the cover, the way that he was presenting his material felt very contemporary. It didn't feel like a standard poetry book you pick off the shelves. It just had just a different feel to it, and it just really stuck out for me. So yeah, I bought it, and then coincidentally, a friend of mine introduced me to Lawrence independently, and so you got to meet this guy, and then we just kind of hit it off, and Lawrence was trying to make exhibitions with his poetry and with a visual kind of counterpart as well. And then we kind of came together. I'm a traditional graphic designer, filmmaker, and I was doing helping him with some of that aspect, some of the visual aspect, and he was writing, and it was a kind of a perfect kind of combination, really. And at that time, Lawrence was finding a real pushback on displaying his work within kind of the traditional art gallery space system, the classic white cube. So we were like, well, why don't we just make our own space? Why do we have to work within these traditional spaces where there's kind of gatekeepers, and there's rules, and there's kind of things you have to abide by. And we were just like, let's make up our own rules, and let's make our own space. And then he came up with the idea of, well, he told me that a cargo container you could park like a car, and I felt that just always stuck with me. I was like, you can park a cargo container like a car, so it could go anywhere, so we can do it in there, and then it was just like, that's when the ball started rolling, and we were just like, let's we've got something here, let's carry on pushing it. And the idea of taking somebody on a journey in a space like they are, there's lots of kind of metaphors there with travel and transportation and all of those things. We thought it was great. You can put somebody in a box and then take them to the other side of the world and have them experience a perspective that they'll never see. And also the opportunity to take those spaces to people that wouldn't necessarily ordinarily go to a gallery. We're kind of maybe a little bit more comfortable in those spaces. But say, other individuals feel like that isn't their world and they wouldn't want to go there. So we were like, let's take the space to the people, as it were. And yeah, and it just that flexibility of movement, and that flexibility of just not having to work under the kind of the supervision of somebody else who we didn't necessarily see eye to eye with. I think that's really the crux of what kind of helped us to kind of get to where we are. I mean, a statement that Lawrence always loves is no permission required, and I think that's kind of fundamentally kind of the backbone of what we do. I mean, we've always been fiercely independent, and I think that's kind of our uniqueness, really, because we're working with a very a space that's not really our space, but we're kind of forging our own path and doing it on our own. And everything we've done obviously with the collaboration and the support of many other people, but generally we're just kind of making our own decisions, and we don't need to answer to anybody. And I think that's helped us to get to where we are.
So you've been working with schools for a few years now, when a school gets involved with Cargo, can we kind of talk about like what do they get? What do they get from working with you and the Cargo and all that stuff? Because we've talked about resources and stuff in the lessons, but like what do they actually get? And then we can kind of talk about that.
I mean, it's many levels, I guess. I mean, it's depending on what kind of how much involvement they want. I mean, there's a workshop level where Lawrence might go to a school and give a talk and a seminar about some of the material that we create, and then maybe engage the children in poetry workshops and more kind of hands-on exercises. And then there's the kind of the work where teachers kind of inform the work that we do. So that we work very closely with, you know, an ever-growing kind of team of teachers and educators, and we might work with them for them to inspire the kind of material that we say we want to focus on. And I mean, there's been so many different kind of relationships with schools and teachers. I mean, maybe you wanted to say, Lawrence, about, you know, some of the experiences you've had. I mean, maybe with Vinetta recently, or you know, I don't know
Yeah, like I said, we've
what
had
springs to mind.
the different types of workshops. I think in the very beginning, we were doing workshops actually with teachers to see what they were looking for and what was required and what their barriers were. And so that helped us with developing the work. But then I go into schools, and we go into schools and we do the workshops. We've launched lessons that we've worked with various schools that have become the resources we do. And with Vanetta Spencer local inner city school in Bristol, we worked with May Park for a launch of what was the Lonnie Johnson primary school lessons. And what we did with that is we ended up doing a workshop with some of the pupils up, the year 6 pupils up at University of Bristol. Now, a lot of these children in this school wouldn't normally see this as a pathway they could take to University of Bristol. They could see a bit beyond the realms of what they were being told they could do, even though they could. And it was very important for us, even though the school from the university is a couple of miles away, a lot of the children that ended up going there to do the workshop, they'd never been to this part of Bristol. And they'd never been to a university or building that was like this building. So they thought it's like Harry Potter when they went in there. And
Yeah, it's quite an opulent kind of, you know, foreboding institution. And for a lot of these kids, they've never seen anything like that, you know, and these huge Georgian townhouses, and you know, there's a big kind of area of Bristol that's owned by the university, so they've kind of got this enclave. And for the students that at that age to come to that space, they just kind of, their eyes were just wide open, and they just couldn't believe what they were seeing. But then to then take them into that space and then teach them more about this kind of inspirational figurehead, Lonnie Johnson, and then to have them do practical exercises, have some fun. You know, there was a lecture. There was a couple of lectures that we gave, as well as then hands-on kind of workshops, so they could get involved with and learn a little bit of science, as well as then walk around the grounds and just kind of understand that this potentially could be a route for them in the future. So we wrapped up quite a few things in that event, but yeah, it was a really unique opportunity for the kids and for the teachers as well to, you know, get out and about.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important part of your program, your initiative, isn't it? This is not history. It's not picking out a few characters from history, a few influential people from history, and teaching it through a history curriculum. This is about embedding things across the curriculum and looking at different people who have impacted different aspects of our society across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk a lot about implementation, and you know, it did start as a kind of a key stage 3 kind of history timeline, but we've been told by many teachers that each of the individuals, because the lessons are individually focused on one person, you know, but they cover a whole kind of, you know, era and a whole kind of thesis, really. You know, we like to focus on an individual because we think it's more tangible for the learner to be able to grasp some of these larger issues. But within that individual story, there's so many different threads. So you could take, for example, with say I get Imhotep, for example, there's so many aspects to his life, you know, whether it's covering kind of science, medical science, or whether it's covering art and architecture. There's lots of threads within that individual story. And then with ancient Egypt as a whole kind of period, I mean, there's so much, but you were able to focus on the individual and make that history, however old it is, tangible to a contemporary kind of classroom. So but yeah, I mean, we like to think that because the resources are really deep and kind of thorough, that you can take portions of those and apply them to various different aspects of the curriculum. So one of the things that we kind of, at the beginning, people were asking us is like, well, do you want to change the curriculum, and do you want to go in there and you want to reform the curriculum? And we're like, we don't need to, because we just give them the tools that enable them to use that within the current structure that we have. And for us, it's about giving teachers the materials and then they can decide how they want to use them. And I think there's flexibility within that for them to do that.
I can just hear schools responding to some of the stuff you give them, like, but we have to change the curriculum. Like the curriculum, it's I was just saying, it's like not about that. And I think what's really interesting, me and Mike were talking before we kind of started recording about like how insular the British curriculum history is. Of we teach these certain periods, you learn about the Egyptians, you learn about the Tudors, World War II, bish bash bosh, that is history completed. Like that's very much how it goes, unless you kind of take history further. And what you're doing is in these lessons or in these moments, trying to expose these students to stories that they're not aware of. I watched something that you put out on the BBC, and it was amazing. Some of the students being like, I literally didn't know this story about this person even existed, and like this is a way for me to engage in history in a different way rather than just learning about the different wives of King Henry VIII. I suppose that's kind of at the core. That's what we learn about in history, right, Mike? Isn't it? Like the wives of King Henry VIII.
Yeah, and if you look at the curriculum, you look at the national curriculum for history, it is so narrow in terms of this is British history and this is this period of British history, that period of British history. And I think looking through, the resources and things that you guys have got, you realize that British history is Black history. Everything is intertwined in terms of our society and the effect we had on the rest of the world. And as Black people came to Britain, how that history then kind of unraveled as well. So there's definitely scope within that curriculum, but it is still very, very narrow.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the power is in the educator's hands to a certain extent, and it's down to, we tend to get more pushback within the older teachers, and then the younger teachers seem to be a little bit more open to maybe involving some of these other narratives within their teaching. So it is the power's in their hands. They can talk about these stories because they do fit within the context of those periods of history that are structured within the curriculum. So you can dip in and out of the stories that we're trying to highlight. And ultimately, I think in the world that we live in now, children have the information at their fingertips, and they're aware of the diversity of the global kind of society we live in, and they want to know more. They want to know more unique stories. They want to know more interesting narratives. And I think for us, it's about that engagement and about people kind of being tuned in and wanting to learn, and having that excited experience. I mean, it was just when we first found out about Lonnie Johnson, the lesson we did, somebody came to us and told us about Lonnie Johnson, and we're like, he's the guy that made the Super Soaker. How can we not make this into a lesson for primary kids? I mean, it's just like, it's the perfect thing. It's like he's also a genius, and an absolute boffin, but that's the way in for the narrative, isn't it? It's like, you tell them that's the guy that invented the Nerf gun, but he's also worked at NASA, and it's like, well, it's the perfect storm of just like fascination and just kind of the fireworks going off in their head. So it's not necessarily a narrative of diversity. It's a narrative of inclusivity and telling a wider story. But it's not, we hate the kind of the divisive racial politics of black and white, because we don't like to say we're offering up a Black history curriculum. It's not about that. It's about a global narrative, and it's about nuance and intrigue as opposed to kind of binary politics, because I think that's and it's a big part. I mean, Lawrence always goes, we make a big point about talking about language within some of the workshops we do, because it's the importance of how this stuff is talked about, because it can often be very divisive, and we try and steer clear of that kind of argument and debate, which is designed to derail the work that gets done. I mean, ultimately, if you get kind of kettled into that kind of argument, then nothing gets done, and we go around in circles, and we've seen it so many times. I mean, Lawrence, you see it every day, don't you? The people that are just embroiled in that conversation, which just seems to go nowhere, and then nothing gets done. So I think people have vested interest in trying to derail the work that gets done by polarizing people's opinions. So I think it's very important to steer clear of that and just excite people with new and interesting stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, bringing politics into the curriculum is never a good mix. But the thing that's striking me and resonating with me when you're talking is, you know, I teach a lot of students from disadvantaged backgrounds and a whole variety of backgrounds. And if they can't see it, they can't be it.
Yeah.
So if all you ever get taught about is influential white people, your aspirations aren't going to be there. You're not going to understand that path and that history that's gone before you. And like you said, standing on the shoulders of people who have gone before you. And for me, that's what our curriculum should be doing. It should be inspiring children to go and do something really, really special with their lives. And I think that's what your resources allow teachers to do.
I think
100%. Yeah,
I
totally agree.
Is that we don't get caught in the conflict of what is already being taught. We don't get into that argument, and we're not trying to take anything away from what's already being taught. We're looking to add to the narrative. We're looking to, in a sense, we're looking to add colour to the curriculum, and that's really what we're doing. So we don't get caught up in our work. We don't use colorisms. We don't use the term black. We don't use the term white. We're not using the term brown. And like I said earlier, this is, however you look, it's just history, or it's just education, or it's just information, it's knowledge. It, like, nothing else is colorized until it comes to what is termed as black history all of a sudden. But all the rest of it is just history. So we're like, it's just history. Yeah, this is just education, this is just knowledge, this is just information. And so with some of it, I think in some places we could be more recognized, or it could be easier to play the color card. Instead of calling it card, we could have just called it a Black History Project. Oh, let's look at black, but we don't want to get caught in that, in that, in a sense, in that lie around the identity of race, which was just an idea 550 years ago. The idea of race was a social construct, and this is a story about humanity, and it's trying to break down some of these barriers that have been put in place to divide us as people. So it's very important for us in the work we do that we don't put barriers up. We're trying to remove barriers and solutions and create solutions. And one of the things I want to say, the problem is there's currency to the problem. The problem pays. The solution removes that. So there's this whole dynamic that keeps, well, the problem. And there's lots of money for the problem. And we're like, we kind of want to make the problem go away. So part of our work in thesis as a work ethic doesn't really make sense. Save our resources, we make them and make them freely available. Well, but you could charge for that, or you could do this for it. We want to remove the barriers to give everybody an equal opportunity to learn.
It's just so, it's really interesting listening to how you come about it. I think that's a really interesting way of going back. I remember when we first spoke, Chaz, you said this, like, this is not about Black History Month where you go in, you do an assembly, the school goes, well, that's Black History, like, fixed, like, we've done that, tick that box, right, back to how many wives King Henry VIII had. You can see why I studied a lot in history. Can I just point out, for GCSE, I had to study the British agriculture of the 1800s. That was my GCSE history project. I don't think there's anything as dull as agriculture in the 1800s of Britain.
I bet there's some interesting stories in there, but they didn't tell you them.
I learned all about the 1846 Drain Act, where farmers were given loan interest loans to create better in their fields. At least. Why do I know that? Why do I still know that? But one thing you were talking about, Chaz, you were saying, like, getting teachers, removing that barrier so they can do it. But it's also about removing the barrier for the students, for the learner, isn't it? If they hear one story, no matter what that story is, and that it engages them with learning, with education, as you were saying, Lawrence, then they suddenly own that education, and they go off and they study things. They might say, right, I'm going to read this book now, or I'm going to go to this museum, or I'm going to go and see this expedition, something like that. So it's about empowering the learner by giving them information, and then they can go off and do what they want with that power.
But I mean, it's also how you give them that information as well. We've learned a lot on this journey in terms of the best way to present this information, and how and what lessons work well, and how do pupils stay engaged. And a big part of the delivery, is all thanks to Lawrence, is the idea of poetry as a method of communication, because contemporary poetry and the way in which it distills the information is such a great hook for kids in school. It's a way in, it's a great kind of doorway to a much bigger scope. And I think, and that's one of the tools we use to kind of help just kind of deliver this material, as well as then the kind of the vibrant illustrations that's kind of the backbone of each of the lessons, because they're targeted at a contemporary audience. They feature a contemporary figurehead. It feels like it's a reflection of a modern take on a historical narrative. And I think that visual kind of those visual toolkits, as well as the poetry and the kind of the distillation of those massive themes and those huge kind of long stories, is a great way for kids to just kind of grapple this information. So yeah, it's a big part for us is engagement, as well as then giving them just hidden history that isn't in the mainstream, and finding those really interesting kind of undercover stories.
Can I ask, Chaz, you spoke earlier about some teachers are resistant to this kind of stuff you're doing. When you're in a workshop and the teacher maybe vocalizes that or something, kind of how do you come back to that and say, like, but this is important? Like, what's your go-to come back to that teacher who says,
And
I need to just teach the curriculum?
Yeah, I mean, a big thing is helping them to understand that this work could help them as opposed to hinder them. The initial feeling from a teacher is, why am I going to take on additional work that I don't quite understand, that I think is going to add to my workload? Because it might actually make your learning experience in your classroom easier and more enjoyable. Because what we did a course with a company called FutureLearn. It's an online course, it's available now. And that was in and around helping teachers teach our material. And one of the big parts of that course was a teacher diary that ran through the course, and you could see teachers for the first time hearing about cargo classroom materials, then kind of learning them and understanding them, and then taking them for a test drive in their classrooms. So you can see a teacher like yourself, a peer, taking the information and then trying it in a classroom. And every time it was a different experience, but every time it was a totally positive and an enriching experience. And one of the standout stories for me was a teacher that was learning alongside their pupils. And it's a kind of a weird dynamic, because teachers always want to be the people in charge of the information, and they want to be the people that feel like they're in command of everything that's happening. But to just kind of relinquish a little bit of that and just kind of go along the journey with their class at the same time, I mean, she found it was just the most amazing experience. So I mean, it was just, there is a lot to be gained, and I think it's letting them understand that there's more to be gained than there is to be lost. And then showing them examples of that in place. And I think why we have these video testimonials, and why we have a lot of this stuff documented, so people can see, and it isn't just arm waving. We can just go have a look at this story and see this individual, and they're just like you, and they had a really positive experience, and the natural instinct is fear, but once you peel that away, then you 99% of the time you're having a positive experience. I mean, Lawrence, what was one of the things that
So I was going to say, sorry, Chaz. I was going to say, I can completely relate to that, Mike. Like, we've all done those lessons, haven't we, Mike? Where like it pushes you out, like it's hard at the start, like pushes you out of your comfort zone, and then quite often they're the best lessons, because you've really had to kind of think about how you're going to deliver it or how you're going to kind of teach it. Mike, like, is that something you found? You've worked with hundreds of teachers across the world, really. Like, is that something you found, like that resistance to doing something new, and then you get so much back from it?
You get, in any change, you get a different groups of people, don't you? You get your early adopters, who you almost have to calm down and say, look, don't change everything straight away. Dip your toe in the water, see how it goes, feel your way into it. And they're really, really keen straight away. you get your kind of majority that will go along with the change and do it kind of pragmatically and quite slowly. And then you get your resistors, don't you? And I think what you're doing with those case studies and those, people saying, this is how I felt at the time, this is how I used it, the resources, here's the impact out of my students. That always helps those resistors get on board eventually. And eventually they will. If there's enough people around them, they'll get on board eventually. But you need those early adopters, really, those kind of trailblazers to go, right, I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to run with it. And I'm going to do something different, because a lot of time when I talk to teachers, I say, if it doesn't challenge you, it's not going to change you. I've been teaching 17 years. I could teach exactly the same PE curriculum I taught in my first year of teaching. It'd be really, really easy. I could plan most of my lessons between the store cupboard and the field. Easy. But then my students aren't going to get the best out of that. They're not going to get inspired about different sports and different activities through me doing that. So I've got to constantly find different ways of delivering different activities or the same activities. And I think teachers on the whole are very, very open to that, but there's always going to be that small group of resistance to it. But once you create that movement, those people eventually do get on board, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of it as well, that they just want to, they feel that they're going to get tripped up, and there's going to be a awkward question from someone in the class, and it's letting them know that that's okay. They don't have to be on top of all the information. It's totally fine. Generally, the pupils will respect them more for going out on a limb and making themselves feel vulnerable, and because they're in the quest of giving them some more depth and more and greater understanding. But yeah, I mean, what do you think, Lawrence? I mean, what was your experiences? I mean, I always remember that one where in the documentary with the kind of hard to reach kids, and as a classroom of 2 students, they didn't really stick around for much. And they were, pretty impenetrable. But yeah, tell them about what happened there.
That's quite funny, Ken. I think part of it, what it is as well, is when people look and they think, if you just use the buzzwords like, oh my God, it's Black history. Often it's quite depressing, and it's something they don't want to look at. So that's what they hear before they come to see what the resources are. And that's where the power of the illustrations come into it, because I'm going to be a bit biased, but they're beautiful. And all of a sudden, you'll see the history that you've seen before. And often the imagery has been very negative. It could be somebody enslaved. It could be somebody being brutalized. And all of a sudden, you'll see these really empowering, beautiful, bright, contemporary images. Looking at it, and also it's like, oh, we could teach that. We could put that in our classroom. And they've got us into so many schools, because we give those posters to any school, anyone listening. If you want some of the posters, when you see them, we give them away for free. And then so many schools have put them up in the classroom because they're beautiful. But it's that the way that contrasts with what they normally see. So with the school that we're talking about, it's like a stage 5 school. In a sense, a bit like a referral unit. And you've got young people there, and a lot of them, with the young people that we're working with, generally they have an attention span of 10 to 15 minutes. That's about it. And then they break out into, they just can't focus anymore. We went in there with them. It was funny, because when we did the workshop and the work with them, I can remember thinking, why are there so many members of staff coming to this class? There's me, there's 2 pupils, and it should just be the teacher. And it was 3 other teachers and a member of security that came to this class with 2 young people that are 14 years old, and not to be thinking, but they're children, but there was this fear of what they might do or what could happen. And it was like, wow, no wonder you get a bit of a pushback if you're having this much of a team around trying to engage with just a couple of pupils. They're always going to feel a bit outnumbered, and always going to feel a bit like, oh, it's us against all of you, and you're always going to back each other up, and we're always going to be on the back foot. So anyway, we've come into the class, we sat there, said to the teacher, you can wait outside. So it ended up just being me and the teacher in the class, and the 2 pupils. And also we had some, because some of this was also later on for the television program. We had the most intrusive cameraman you could ever imagine, who had a very short throw lens. So he had to literally be 3 foot away from your face when he's filming, because he wanted to use a short throw lens. So the fact that they got over that as well, but they were so engaged with the work, with the illustrations, the poetry, and actually how it was presented to them. They stayed engaged. They ended up creating their own image and taking from the information they'd done. They put those in by using dots to represent certain parts of the story, colors onto the paper. And they stayed fully engaged for over an hour in this lesson. Everybody in the school couldn't believe what was actually happening. They've never been this engaged, but they really had interest in it. And I think what's the most remarkable thing is later on we found out that one of the two young people chose to take history up as a subject, which for us it was like, wow. But because he found something that he could connect to and he actually found interest in that hadn't done before. So I think it's part of it is the way that all the resources really, they're so over engineered. We get a spine of what we could get away with teaching it as a lesson, and then we add as much more information as possible to make them as exciting and as engaging as possible. And we ensure that when you go through the pages or the slides, however you want to present it, we ensure that they're not all just text heavy. We have text, we have part of the curriculum, and then we have an image or a video. Then we have some more information, then something visual. So we're trying to engage with people that might have a short attention span, like myself. So it's like we put something on the screen, so you keep drawing you back. There's always something to see, there's something to hear, there's something to see. And that seems to be what is part of the magic of the resources we've created, that they really engage with people. And I think the one thing I want to say, because that was actually an art class, that was an art class what it was in. So what it is about the way that it works cross-curriculum, because of the poetry, these resources can be used in English. Because of the illustrations and the art, they can go to your art class, as well as history. And then there's further lessons they can be included in, depending on who the subject is. But who the person is, but for that was an art class that was being used in, where through art, they were learning history at the same time. So yeah, it was really rewarding to see it reaching, especially children that were deemed to be very hard to connect with.
I really
I've
like
got this amazing image, Lawrence, of this student coming out of your lesson just buzzing about history, sign up for history, and then walking in the first lesson, be like, "We're looking at the agriculture in the 1800s."
And that's when he got interested, Mike. That's when he really thought, this is for me. No, I've seen that footage, Lawrence, and it's just there's this great footage where the teacher's just going, I can't believe how long we've been in this classroom. And then you get one of the students being like, how long have I been learning this? Like, it's just there's a great moment in it. And me and Mike were also talking before we recorded of genuinely how beautiful and awesome these resources are. Like, the website is incredible. The footage, the videos, the resources for the lessons are absolutely amazing. So anyone listening to this who's got any interest in anything we've said right now, please go and have a look. So Charles,
just Google Cargo Classroom and you'll go straight in there. It'll come up top of Google, and you go straight into the main Cargo Classroom website, which will give you all the information. And there's an implementation video, and there's a reason why video, and then there's the lessons. There are 3 stages, which will give you a really broad understanding of why we do what we do, how you can do what you do, and the material of itself, which is really easy and free to access. So yeah, Cargo Classroom.
And if from there people then want to talk about these, getting involved more with what you do they just go, is it all through the website?
Yeah, you can just email us info@cargomovement.org. And you can just drop us an email, and we and like I said, like Lawrence said, we give away free posters to anybody who just drops us a line, and we'll get them in the post to you. So yeah, we think we try and we really believe in digital engagement. That's the world we're living in at the moment, but there's no substitute for something tangible, big, bright, stuck on a classroom wall, because it sparks the most amount of conversations. People go, "What? Who's that? What's that doing up there?" And then that's the way in, isn't it? And as many tools as we can give teachers, the better, and for free. So yeah,
free resources. Teachers are always interested, Chaz, always interested. Thank you so much for your time, Chaz and Lawrence. It's been a fascinating conversation, and anyone listening, please just go to the website, and within about 10 seconds, you'll realize you're going to spend a long time on this website, because that's exactly what I did. Typed in, oh, I've just lost a few hours just going through all the resources. It's a fantastic stuff. And what you're doing is absolutely brilliant. And thank you so much for giving up your time for Tea and Teaching this evening.
Not a problem at all. Thank you
Listeners,
for your
we'll be
time.
back in a moment.
Welcome back to Tea and Teaching. Arthur, amazing chat with Chaz and Lawrence. They're doing so much good work for education and society as a wider whole. How did you find that chat?
Just fascinating, insightful, and just when Lawrence told that story at the end, like that's what it's about. It's about giving these students just a chance to engage with history and engage with education, and the way they go about it, kind of using digital media and kind of these posters and stuff. It's just such a interesting way to go about it. And when Lawrence was saying that was actually an art class that kind of became a history class and kind of became this, just really interesting. I would just implore anyone who's like, listen to this, just type in cargo movement and just go onto their website, and you'll just get it. Like, very hard to take a single takeaway from that, Mike. Like, I've got some notes, but it was more kind of the whole conversation was a takeaway. But if I was to push you for that thing that you've really taken away from this, what would you go for? Hard question.
It is hard. I guess two things. I love the way they're using inspirational people as the in. So it's not about a timeline of history. It's not about a particular time in history. It's about individuals in history who have made a real impact. And then what goes around, you know, they were talking about the artwork that might support a story about one of those individuals, or the scientific discoveries they made might take you down a different road. So the way they were using individuals was really interesting. And then I found it really interesting when they talked about as well, I think Lawrence talked about the fact that there's profitability in a problem, is that we're not just expecting society to just recognize these people and these achievements and make things right in terms of our education. Is that we actually have to go and do something about it, because that problem's not going to fix itself. There's not going to be an adjustment of that without brave teachers saying, I'm going to go out on a limb here, I'm going to try something new, and I'm going to use these resources and implement something for my students that I think could be really inspirational.
Absolutely. What you said about being brave there and kind of just going for it and kind of like recognizing this is something you should be doing because it's going to just enhance. And they spoke about how it enhances kind of the learning for everything, because these just make them better students. For me, it's when they spoke about we spoke about kind of curriculum stuff, and we're just trying to add to the narrative. We're just trying to add to this narrative, add some extra stories. Like, we're not taking away stuff. We're not saying don't study agriculture in the 1848, but we are saying, like, let's just give extra opportunities to have different conversations and share some stories. And as we said, like, the way they go about it is such an interesting and different way is often done. That I would challenge any kind of teacher, especially history teachers, go and have a look and just give it a go. See what happens, see where it leads to, see what conversations are had in the classroom, because I guarantee it's going to be an interesting lesson. That's what you said, Mike, about re-challenging. They're the best lessons. Like, when you challenge yourself, you get great lessons and great learning out of it.
And on that bombshell, we shall finish, Arthur. Thank you very much to you. Thanks to Chaz and Lawrence, and thank you to you, listeners.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Tea and Teaching.
If you've enjoyed the content of this episode, please feel free to share it with other educators.
And if you're able to, please leave a review on the platform.
And as always, thank you for listening to Tea and Teaching.